In the previous video, we set up our Hello World application, and what I want to do now is take you through setting up the emulator so that when we get to the next video, we can run this application. Now, Android Studio should have set up an emulator for you when you installed it, but I want to go through and show you how to do that again anyway. And that's because it's useful to know how to create new emulators so that you can download and test on different Android versions when you're going to release your app. So to get to the Android Virtual Device Manager, you can either click on this little button over here. Alternatively, you can click on Tools, Android, and select AVD Manager. So you can see that I've got an Android virtual device already set up, but I'm going to delete that, as I mentioned, and walk through the process of creating it again. So I'm going to click on this little triangle that's on the far right, and that's because it's a menu. And from there, when I click on it, I can select Delete and click on Yes. Now, if you've got everything deleted, like I have, you'll start off with a screen that looks like this. So let's come down here and click on Create Virtual Device. And I'll just expand this a little bit bigger so I can see it a bit better. Now, I'm going to choose the Nexus 5X here for a few reasons. Firstly, it's a good one for testing purposes. And secondly, it's the physical device that I actually own. Now, if you're a bit short on memory or you've got a slow computer, then you may be better off with something like the Nexus 4 that uses less resources. Now, this Play Store column is actually quite important because it tells us which devices can access the Google Play Store. Now, at the time I'm recording this, only the Nexus 5 and Nexus 5X emulators are able to download apps from the Play Store, and of course that might change over time. Now, there are a couple of implications of that. The first one is that you can install apps from the Play Store on other devices, the Nexus 4 for example. But that's not normally a problem because you usually use the emulator for testing your own apps. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. Now, another implication is to do with root access. But don't worry about that at the moment. Just be aware that there are things you can't do on the Play Store emulators. That's something else we'll discuss later in the course. Once you've selected a device, click on Next. So again, I'm selecting the Nexus 5X. Now this next screen lets you choose which system image to use. And you can see at the top there's 3 tabs here. The first one is the recommended devices, and you can download the images from here using the download link. So if I wanted to select the API 24 version, I could just click on download there. That would download and then I would be able to access that and use that. But in my case, you can see we've got one that hasn't got the download option, and that means that it's already been installed on this computer. Now note that these devices, over here to the right on the target, have got Google Play in the target name. If we'd chosen a different model of phone on the previous screen, the target names probably wouldn't include Google Play. Now there's also this tab up here for x86 images, and also one for other images. Now the x86 images does give you a lot of choice, but the decision's quite easy when you're starting off. Now the easy one is if you're running Linux. If that's the case, you just choose an x86 image for Android O Oreo. So you would choose this one if you're running Linux. You don't have to worry about Haxum or anything like that. And if you've gone through the earlier video of checking and configuring visualization support in your BIOS, then there's really nothing more to be done. Linux will happily use the x86 system images. Now, if you're running on a Mac or Windows, then the x86 images will give the best performance, provided you manage to get Haxum installed. Now, if you did, then you're in the same position as Linux users, so again, choose an x86 image. Now, if you're on Windows or a Mac without Haxum, the x86 emulators won't run. They'll refuse to start because Haxum isn't available. So in that case, you should use the other images to use an ARM image. Now, all modern Macs can run Haxum, although you may need to install the latest updates on your Mac. So if you didn't manage to install Haxum, sort that out before continuing now. On Windows, you can only install Haxum if your computer has an Intel processor and supports virtualization. So if you've got an AMD processor, unfortunately you'll have to choose the ARM EABI-V7A image from the Other Images tab. Now these system images, these ARM system images, are unfortunately a lot slower than the x86 ones, so only use these if you've got no other choice. In fact, it's worth checking out the Genymotion emulators instead, because these ARM images in Android Studio are very slow indeed. Now I'm going to add a link to the Genymotion website. It's available at genymotion.com. So if we quickly have a look at this Genymotion website, paste that in, and this link will be in the resources section of this video, there's an option over here to click in the top right called Trial. So if I click on that, you'll be asked to register before you can actually download anything. Once you've registered, you need to find the link for the personal version. At the moment, that's on a button when you scroll down the page, but that may well change. So be prepared to hunt around the site to find it. But again, that's only if you can't get some of these other system images to work. Now going back to Android Studio, if you can use the x86 system images that come with Android Studio, then I certainly recommend that you use them. Otherwise, check out the Genymotion emulator if you find the ARM system images are too slow. Now, if you're happy with working at the command prompt, I'm going to be putting some instructions on how to use the x86 emulators from a command prompt. That'll let you run them on Windows without Haxum and gives better performance than the ARM system images, but we'll add a document to the FAQ section explaining how to do that. Okay, so back to the x86 images. So I'm going to use the Oreo image API 26. Now the target here is Android 8 Google APIs, as you can see there. So note that Google APIs isn't the same thing as Google Play. So this emulator won't be able to access the Google Play Store. So that's fine, I'm going to be using this emulator for most of the apps in this course, but we will be installing a Play Store emulator for the YouTube app a little bit later. So if you've got this option here and there's a download link, you'll need to click it at this point. In my case, it's already downloaded, so I can just click on Next after making sure that the Oreo version API level 26 is selected and clicking on Next. Now it's here that we get the chance to change the configuration. And you've got a few options here, so I'm going to go through and explain what they are. Firstly, the AVD name. Now you can change that to something else if you want to, but the suggested name is pretty good unless you create a lot of emulators. Then it's a good idea to use a name that describes it a bit better, so you know what all your Nexus images are, for example. The default name's fine here, so I'm just going to leave it as that. Right, so there's another chance here to choose a different device by clicking the Change button, and I could also choose a different version of Android if I had the images downloaded, and that'll just show a screen similar to the previous one, so I'm going to leave them both as they are. Now in this next section down here, you can actually choose, you can change the orientation, but you can also do that while the device is running. So if you created a tablet instead of a phone, then landscape would make more sense as the default orientation rather than portrait. Now the emulated performance down here, that's going to let you use the host's GPU, the graphics processing unit, which can speed up the emulator display quite a lot. But it can also cause problems with some systems though. So it's best to leave it as I've got it on automatic to start with, but if you do get GPU or GL errors when running the emulator, then come back here and change it to software instead. And that prevents the emulator from attempting to use your graphics card processor if there are problems. Now also try software if your emulator hangs and doesn't fully start up. Sometimes that fixes the problem. Now if Haxum isn't installed on Windows, then select software. Without Haxum, hardware often doesn't work. The emulator isn't always very good at detecting that, so it's best to set it explicitly here in that scenario. Now this device frame, that looks nice on the screen, so I'm going to leave that ticked. It's really just eye candy though, so on slower machines it's probably worth unticking just to save for some resources. And the Show Advanced Settings button lets you configure things like the amount of RAM to allocate for the emulator. If I click on that and have a look, scroll down a little bit, you can see here that currently it's defaulting to 1536 megabytes, that's 1.5 gig, that the emulator will use from your system resources. So on a 4 gig system, you're going to give a lot of memory to the emulator. You may want to knock that down a lot in that scenario. 1 gig or even 768 meg may work better on a system with low memory. Now the VM heap is needed for the Java runtime on the device, the emulator, and comes out of the total memory that you've allocated. Now internal storage uses a file on your hard drive, so this 800 megabytes here isn't coming out of your memory. There's not really anything to be gained from increasing it, so unless you intend to install hundreds of apps on the emulator, I'd say leave it unchanged. And specifying an external file for the SD card is an advanced thing to do, and there's not much point changing that at this stage either. You'd do that if you wanted to sort of pretend you'd taken it out of the emulator and plugged it into your computer, like you could do with a real SD card, but that's not something we're going to be doing in this course. Now when I click that Show Advanced Settings option, the device frame option's moved. You can create custom skins for the emulator. That's just eye candy really, but it can be useful when you've come to publish your app because you can capture a screenshot of it running on an emulator, and obviously that'll look better if it looks like a real device rather than just a square box. So when the time comes for you to publish apps on the Google Play Store, then certainly play around with skins if you want. This is the section I'm talking about down here. But we're just starting out, so either just accept the one suggested that I'm going to do, or you can untick Enable Device Frame if you want to speed things up a little and give your computer less work to do. So finally down here, there's this option for Enable Keyboard Input. Well, that box lets you use your computer's keyboard to type into the emulator. So that's quicker than using the emulator's on-screen keyboard, but can alter the way your app works. So I definitely recommend testing your app on an emulator that has this option unticked, so you get a feel of how it behaves on the majority of devices. So most users don't connect an external keyboard to their phones, which is basically what this option is doing. So being forced to use the same keyboard as your users can reveal some unexpected behavior. Now it's much quicker to type on a computer keyboard though, so I'm going to leave this box ticked for now. So once you've got everything selected and set up, click on Finish. And the device manager sets everything up and takes you back to the main AVG screen, and you can now see our new device listed. So at the right over here are 3 icons. And we've already seen the little triangle down here that actually gives you a list of options. You can duplicate this AVD, you can wipe the data, you can show where it is on disk, view the details or delete, or even stop it if it's currently executing. But for the other 2 icons, the pencil icon will let you edit your emulator. So if I click on that, and it just goes back to the screens that we were working on previously, and you can make changes to that emulator. But obviously we don't need to do that because we've just created it. Now this green triangle here, well, that actually starts the emulator. So I'm going to click that and the emulator will start up. Just going to move that over. I'm just going to close that little screen down now. Now it takes a little while for the emulator to start up, even on my Mac with 32 gigabytes of RAM, so you may have to be patient depending on the speed and capacity of your computer. And it can take literally half an hour or longer to start an emulator up on some systems, so it's a good idea to start it before you actually start coding. That way it's up and going and it's ready for you to use. Now I'm going to let Android Studio launch the emulator for us, so I'm going to close this one down for now. But if your emulator takes a long time to start, then launch one from here so that it's available when you need it. So I'm just going to click over here, click on close, hold the button down and select power off. And that's shut down the emulator. This will be a little confirmation in the bottom right hand corner. Now the last thing I want to point out is the 3 different types of system images in terms of their behaviors. Now the easiest place to see this is in the SDK manager. So I'm going to come over here to Tools, Android, SDK Manager. We're going to come down here and click on Show Package Details, make sure that's checked. And that's obviously available in the SDK Platforms tab up here. Now starting with Android 8 and ignoring the Android TV and Android Wear system images, you can see we've got various system images available. Now I don't know if Google is going to be releasing ARM images for Oreo, but at the moment I haven't got them available. What I have got are 2 Intel x86 system images available, Google APIs, Intel x86 and Google Play Intel x86. And again, we're ignoring the Android TV Intel x86 Atom system image. So if you need root access to the AVD, and we'll be seeing that later in this course, then we'll have to use the Google APIs system image. But if you need access to the Google Play Store so that you can install apps on the device, then you'll want to use the Google Play system image. There is a third variant, and we can see that in the Android 4.2 section. All the way down here, there's an Intel x86 system image with neither Google APIs or Google Play APIs. You can see here just Intel x86 Atom system image. In the YouTube section of this course, I'm going to be using the API 17 version of this system image under Android 4.2. And I'm only going to be using that to show you an error we'll get because YouTube isn't installed on this system image. It's also a good version to check when we look at material design in section 9. So starting from the top again, the system images we're going to be using are the 2 Android 8 Oreo ones, the Google API Intel x86 Atom system image, and the Google Play Intel x86 Atom system image. That's from the Android 8. And under Android Nougat, we're also going to be using the Google APIs Intel x86 Atom, and as I mentioned, right down to Android 4.2. We're going to be using this one as well. Now, if you're running Windows and can't get Haxum working, then you won't be able to use the x86 system images from Android Studio. There is a way to run them from the command line, and I'm going to be putting a document in the FAQ section describing how to do that. And it'll also describe some other options for you to consider as well. So that's emulators. We've now got one installed. Let's move on to the next video. We're going to actually get our Hello World app running on this emulator. So I'll see you in the next video.